Hello everybody, this is Mr. Morgan and you're watching the first video from A Tale of Two Cities. A Tale of Two Cities is Charles Dickens' masterpiece, and it talks about the French Revolution, its reasons, events, and its consequences. But what are the two cities mentioned in the title? The two cities are London and Paris. Before talking about the novel, let's talk about the author, Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens was a famous English writer and one of the best novelists all over the world. Dickens was also a social reformer, and he tried to solve some social problems through his works. And most of his works discuss the themes of poverty, corruption, humiliation, oppression, and so many other problems. A Tale of Two Cities talks about the French Revolution and how it affected people in France and abroad. Dickens discussed the idea of the French Revolution through a family lived between Paris and London, which is Dr. Manette's family. The novel takes place in France and England and starts in 1775. The introduction of his masterpiece, A Tale of Two Cities, was one of the most famous introductions in the English history. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. To understand such a contradiction, you should know that the French people was divided into two parts, the top and the mob. The top includes the king, the aristocrats, and the rich people. The other part, the mob, includes the peasants, the beggars, the paupers, and the poor people. Now we can understand such a riddle. So, it was the best of times for the top, the king, the queen, and the aristocrats, because they sat on their thrones and they got what they wanted and enjoyed their life the most. And it was the worst of times for the poor people, because they had to struggle every day just to survive. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the age of wisdom for the poor, the pauper, because they know their way to their freedom, which was the revolution. And it was the age of foolishness for the aristocrats, the king and the queen, because they thought that everything seemed to be settled forever and it wanted change. At that time, in 1775, France was ruled by King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, when England was ruled by King George III and Queen Sophia. Dickens started his novel with so many contradictions to show that how the king and aristocrats had everything while the poor were in a continuous suffering just to live. Later, he declared how France and England were in a very bad condition. In France, there was too much oppression that they tortured a 12-year teen before killing him just because he didn't kneel down to a religious official. In England, no one could feel safe. There were dangerous robberies all over the country. Kings and queens of England and France at that time were so greedy. They seemed too much alike. They didn't care about the people. They only cared about themselves and the aristocrats. The Dover Mail. Before starting this part, we should discuss some important points. Traveling at that time was so hard. To move inside the country at that time was only by horses or by the mail, which was a coach pulled by horses. And traveling between England and France was by ships. So, to travel from London to Paris, you would take the mail from London to Dover, then a ship to Calais, and another coach from Calais to Paris. Traveling at that time wasn't only exhausting, but it was also dangerous because of the robberies going on all over England and France. Tellson's Bank. It was a famous bank at that time. There was a branch in London and another one in Paris. Mr. Lorry, a 60-year-old man. He has worked in Tellson's for a long time. Mr. Lorry was on the Dover Mail. That's because he was going to Paris. Lucy Manette. She is the heroine of the novel and the daughter of Dr. Manette. Dr. Manette, or Alexander Manette, a good doctor who has disappeared for a long time. So his daughter Lucy thinks that he is dead. Miss Pross, an English woman, she is the maid who brought Lucy up and takes care of her. She loves Lucy very much as if she is her daughter, and she is ready to sacrifice her life for Lucy. Chapter 1 Summary. When Mr. Lorry was going to Dover by the mail, Jerry Cruncher, a messenger from Tellson's Bank, has followed him to hand him a message. The message said that Mr. Lorry should wait for Lucy Manette at Dover. In Dover, Mr. Lorry meets Lucy in the coffee room of the Dover Inn. Lucy tells Mr. Lorry that she has come to meet him because she received a letter from Tellson's Bank said that she should travel to France because there is new information about her dead father's property. But Mr. Lorry tells her the truth, that it was he who sent the letter to bring her to Paris, not because of her father's property and fortune, but because he discovered that her father is still alive in France, and so they are going to fetch him back. Lucy said that she's going to see her father's ghost. She felt shocked and fainted. Suddenly, a red-headed woman enters the room. It is Miss Pross. She takes a look at Lucy and pushes Mr. Lorry against the wall. Mr. Lorry tries to calm her down, but she was so angry because he scared Lucy to death, as she said. At the end, they decide to go to Paris together to save Dr. Manette.